Okay, so it's chapter 11, scene size up. So basically talking about what you do when you first roll up to scene for any particular scene. So we're going to look for hazards, and our main goal here is to determine whether it's safe enough for us to go do our thing or not. We're going to look at mechanisms of injury and basically get a general picture of what's going on in our heads. And then we're going to fairly quickly figure out if we need to call for anybody else to get there, any other resources. So if we're dealing with any kind of hazmat issue, our scene size up is going to be done from a long time or a long distance away. We use the rule of thumb, as in if you can cover up the scene with your thumb, then you're about far enough away. So things in general that we're looking for, scene safety issues. We're going to get our standard precautions going. So non-COVID pandemic times, that's usually just a pair of gloves. For responding to things now, that's our gloves, mask, goggles. We're going to figure out what's going on as far as the mechanism of injury, or in the case of medical problems, what their nature of the illness is. We're going to figure out the number of patients, and then decide what else to call, or who else to call. So determining the number of patients can be tricky sometimes, especially on car accident scenes, because sometimes people are out walking around and you're not sure who's a patient, who's not. Sometimes people are still in the cars. But try and figure it out as quick as you can and get additional resources rolling if you need it. Okay, so we're going to go through each of these things just a little bit more detail here. The only thing predictable is that things are unpredictable. Okay, so what are we watching for? First, watch for other emergency vehicles coming in, lights and sirens. As if everybody's running lights and sirens and everybody thinks that everybody else is yielding to everybody else, then you have fire trucks hitting ambulances or fire trucks hitting police cars and that kind of thing. So pay attention for other flashy lights. If you're driving along and getting close to your scene and all of a sudden everything's dark and there's no power, you might suspect that somebody's run into a power pole, and there might be down power lines. Look at traffic flow, so especially on like divided highways or roads where there's a nice big median, you know, where you can't flip U-turns and stuff. If there's no traffic coming the other way, there's probably a pretty good accident that's blocked off everything. Look for smoke towards your scene. When you start getting like basically on scene, so you actually see what's going on, and you start looking for more detailed things. So look for pools of fluid. Most modern vehicles have pretty good gas tank systems, and you're not going to find large puddles of gas most of the time. Look for people that got ejected or got run into. Look for smaller little bits of smoke, like engine compartments and stuff. And again, look for utility poles and down wires. So if you're looking at this scene right here, how safe does that look?
On a scale of 1 to 10?
Sure.
7. I mean, I don't know, I can't say.
10 is really safe, or 10 is dangerous?
I'd say 10 is really safe, but it really depends because you can't really tell what kind of road is in the back. You can't see beyond the door. if
Certainly
there's
not a major highway, right? It's a
It's
pretty
kinda like
small
driving.
road.
I mean, there's no.
There's no like
lines there.
pools or smoke.
You can't see any lines down. They did hit some kind of pole here, but it's still up. They did knock it over.
Upon, once you arrive on scene, first of all, you're gonna make sure to see if that is a power line or a pole, and then you're gonna do like a walk around from a safe distance at that vehicle and make sure there's no fluids or victims anywhere.
Yeah, and realizing this little grassy thing, you're not going to see much as far as fluids, even if there's a bunch leaking.
Yeah.
How about the car itself? Any dangers?
Glass.
So there's no broken glass really that I can see. I mean, maybe that window's busted out. You can't really see, but windshield's intact. That window's intact. You're good
Make sure
there.
it's turned on.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, make sure the vehicle's turned off and that, the battery is disconnected.
Yeah, people often forget to put their, car in park and you turn it off and that kind of thing. You'll get there and somebody will just have their foot on the brake or something. You start moving and there goes the car. So that's a bad thing. The vehicle's on its wheels. It's not on its side or on its roof or something like that. You're not really worried about it sliding down the hill any further or anything. It's resting up against a pole, so the vehicle itself should be pretty stable. That's one of those things you really got to be careful for on car accident scenes, is just running right up to the car and then the car shifts and rolls on you or something like that. Watch out for people, pedestrians all the time, but you'll often get people milling around. Somebody's probably going to start directing you in on where to park. At least with our response system, there's almost always going to be some kind of fire command person there on scene before you get the ambulance there. Not every time, but 90% of the time probably. Somebody else is there and they're going to be telling you where to park your rig. So just watch for somebody to direct you where they want you to go. Ambulances aren't necessarily the thing that's going to be the closest to where the patient is as far as like parking stuff goes. So the vehicle that gets the highest priority as far as being close to the scene is the rescue rigs, because those things have all the big heavy extrication equipment and some stuff that runs off of the rescue rig itself, like with extension cords. So that vehicle generally needs to be the closest thing there, and the ambulance can be about the second closest. So again, there's probably going to be a fire command officer on scene for any kind of dangerous incident, for sure, any kind of car accident, fire, or whatever. Put on your appropriate PPE. So if you're going in for a COVID patient, this is probably the minimum. If you're going to work on the side of the road, a set of turnouts is not a bad idea. So we generally have 2 sets of pants, or at least 2 jackets. I don't know if we actually have pants anymore, but we have a couple of turnout coats stuffed on each ambulance, so you can grab those and put them on if you need to. If you've got things like actively burning cars, establish a danger zone, make sure people aren't getting in there, getting close. And depending on what's going on, depends on how far back you need to keep people. So how far back do you think you need to be from that car?
100 yards.
A ways. 100 yards might be a little far, but that's pretty far. But realize modern engines, when they get to that point, if they haven't exploded, they're about to have a nice big magnesium boom going on. Magnesium burns pretty good, and they use it in most modern car engines anymore.
Yeah, if you're driving the ambulance, you want to leave some space for the fire engines to get in.
Yeah, no, you're not you're not putting your ambulance anywhere near that thing. For like your non-car accident scenes, other things you're gonna look for, scene safety wise, fighting sounds, people carrying weapons, they're not using weapons, alcohol and drug use, people acting strangely, unusual silence, knowledge of prior violence. So there's some places we go that are more frequent offenders than others. Yeah, what kind of calls do you think we run into that are the most hazardous for us?
Domestic abuse.
Hazardous or
Not.
potential violence? Or both?
I guess this says potential violence, does it? Yeah, either way. Answer either way. But yes, domestic abuse is probably a good one for potential violence. In general, danger, yeah. Car accidents, mostly because of all the rest of the traffic on the road. The law enforcement types generally don't like to shut down the highway unless they really have to. So there'll almost always be at least one lane of traffic working through your scene. If it's bad enough, they'll shut it down and start setting up detours and stuff, but in general, they don't. Other things for potential violence, I think mostly drug use stuff, especially the stimulants, your cocaines and your methamphetamines and that kind of thing. Those people can get crazy.
If there is an event where the ambulance needs to respond to a working structure fire and there's patients from inside, that can be pretty hazardous too.
Yeah, certainly for patients' perspective, yeah. And for working there, the ambulance crew is usually not going to get real close at all to that kind of scene. We're going to sit back in a well and cold area and let the firefighters bring the patient back to us. Okay, so that's scene safety stuff. Nature of the call. So broadly, we throw our calls into two different categories. So one is trauma, or an injury call, and the other is a medical call. Okay. So on the trauma type calls, so this is your car accidents, your falls, your whatever, you want to determine the mechanism of injury. So what happened to hurt that person? On your medical calls, you're going to figure out basically why they called. What are they complaining of? Or how are they sick? So mechanism of injury is just a fancy way of saying what happened to them. How did they get hurt? If you can figure out what happened to them, you can kind of predict injury patterns and find injuries hopefully faster than you would otherwise. So especially with vehicle crashes, you can do a little bit of predicting what injuries you're going to find. So we categorize these head-on collisions into a couple different injury patterns. One is this up and over injury pattern. And so this is typically when your patient is not wearing a seatbelt. And they come smashing into something and they're going to go up over the steering wheel and up into the windshield. And the other one is the more down and under. Which can happen occasionally with a seatbelt that's too loose, or it just doesn't, there's just a lot of energy in that crash. And in that case, they're sliding more underneath and they're going to have more leg injuries. For rear end collisions, mostly what you're looking at is whiplashy effects for at least the patients in the front car. And who has the worst injuries usually is just whoever's got the bigger vehicle has the least injuries, right? So what do you think about mechanism of injury on this scene here?
Rear end.
So it's rear end. How bad is the damage here?
Pretty good for rear end.
That is pretty good for rear end, and that's pretty good for a truck of that age,
Yeah.
honestly. So, modern vehicles have, you know, all the crush zones and crumple zones and stuff. And you get on scene and it looks like the thing, you know, just went to hell. But everybody inside is okay because that's what they're designed to do, right? And so if you get on scene and see these old cars that are really messed up, you should be afraid because there's a lot of forces involved to mess those cars up like that. So yeah, that truck was probably cooking pretty good to get all that smashed up in the back of that minivan. How about rollovers? How bad are these patients hurt?
Spinal injuries.
So you're bad.
Usually pretty left up.
It depends on if they're wearing their seatbelt or not, and how their seatbelt fits.
Actually, yeah, that's the right answer. So it's one or the other. They're either messed up or they're walking around and smoking a cigarette when you show up. So if they're wearing their seatbelt and there's not a lot of intrusion and not a lot of stuff inside that vehicle bashing them while it's rolling over, the rolling over part kind of dissipates the energy of the crash and the car comes to a rest a little slower than just a smack, you know, bam, where it decelerates really fast.
I have a question. So, like on a rollover injury, is it more like complex of a spinal injury purely because it's like forces coming from a bunch of different, like it's kind of side to side and back and forth versus like if you get rear-ended, you're basically just gonna go back.
Yeah, no, so if they're not wearing their seatbelt and they get rolled over, then it's just like, you know, you put them in a snow globe and shoot the crap out of them, right? Then, yeah, they can be injured anywhere and all over all at once. And so it's usually bad. And it's either that or they're injured all over and they're laying on the floor of this thing, or they're tossed out through a window and they're laying on the middle of the field or something dying, yeah.
I was just gonna say that, would that be another huge, thing for rollovers is a lot of times people would be like ejected.
Yeah, if they're not wearing their seatbelt and they get ejected, that's super high mechanism of injury. It's bad news for patients. But yeah, and like this car, all the glass is intact. So it didn't land on its roof real hard. The back is busted out. The glass on the other side might be busted out. But it's not, you know, crushed flat where the roof is up into somebody's head. I would suspect if somebody was wearing their seatbelt, they're walking out of that thing just fine.
How do you go about extracting people from rollover?
So that's a whole class on its own, vehicle extrication, yeah. So, I mean, the short of it is you put braces on the wheels here, prevent that thing from doing anything, and then you cut the roof off. So cut here, cut there, and same on the other side, and then you just slide them out on the roof. But it gets more complicated than that on occasion, but that's the long and short. Other mechanisms of injury to worry about. Adults, more than 20 feet, or in general, you know, 3 times your height. And this varies a lot, just depending on what people land on. A fall onto a bush is a lot different than a fall onto concrete. How they landed is obviously a big part of it too. So if you can land on your legs and, you know, do a little tuck and roll maneuver or something, then probably a lot better off than if you land on your neck. And think about, did they hit anything on their way down too that might have interrupted their fall? If they were falling out of a tree, did they clip 5 branches on the way down or something? For your knifey injuries, basically what's going to be injured is directly what's under the, where it got stabbed, right? You can be stabbed multiple times, but knife injuries aren't, I don't know, sneaky. Like bullet wounds can be. So your lower to medium velocity weapons, like a 22 pistol or something, you get shot with one of those things, the bullet can go anywhere in there. Hit bones and bounce off, and you can, have an entrance wound here and an exit wound up here or something. They get weird. Your higher velocity rounds are just going to go through and through, but they're going to leave a big exit wound coming out the back end of it. You get things like hollow point bullets that are designed to break when they get in there, and that does a lot of damage. Blunt force stuff. We're not going to see a lot of like bruising and stuff usually by the time we get there, unless it's injuries are a day or two old. So bruising is kind of a later sign of injury, but that would be the more outward signs. Most of the time, they're just going to be complaining of pain to that area. That's going to be your main sign symptom. Okay, that's the trauma stuff. And on the medical side, basically you're looking at why they called you. So is it they're having a stroke, they're having a heart attack, they're feeling sick, they're whatever, dog died and now they're suicidal, whatever their issue is. So most often we're going to get that direct from the patient themselves. You just walk up and say, what's going on today? What can we do for you? What happened? Occasionally your patient's going to be unconscious, unresponsive, not able to talk to you directly, maybe mentally incompetent in some way. And so then you get that information from family, bystanders, and then from the scene. So what kind of information can we get just from the scene?
Were there any like bodily fluids?
Right, so what substances are around that they might have been taking? Pill bottles.
Syringes,
Yep.
things like that.
Yep. General condition of the scene, is it nicely kept up house and everything's clean and put away and that kind of thing? Is it disorderly and empty fridge and that kind of thing? Is somebody starving to death? Number of patients. So again, we need to figure this out pretty quickly. And mainly because it takes time to get more ambulances there, right? So if you can start that process sooner, then people will get help sooner. What you don't want to do is be 10 minutes into a scene and go, oh, there's 2 more patients over here. We need another ambulance, and then that's 10 minutes wasted. How many patients can we take in one ambulance? 2. I see.
It really depends.
I think it would also depend on if there's like a parent and like a child.
Yeah.
Big people are.
So it does depend. Okay, so I'll refine my question. How many patients can we take that are on backboards? See, one, actually two. Yeah, we can put 2 people on a backboard in the back of the ambulance. So you put one on the gurney, you load them in, then transfer them over to the bench seat, and then unload the gurney and put the next one on, and then you can transport 2 that way. So, and then if you've got other patients that need a ride, you could potentially stick somebody in like the captain's chair, seatbelt them in, if they're not too terribly injured. So you could put 3 people in an ambulance, probably. It's a little uncomfortable. And then you need really 3 EMTs to be caring for all 3 of those patients. And so that gets pretty crowded in the back. But you could do it if you had to. We generally like just 1 patient per ambulance. It's best care for the patients and easiest in the back. Yeah, it depends. When I was back in Colorado, the local ambulance service there had special like hooks in their ceiling. A couple of their ambulances could take 4 patients on a backboard if they needed to. You'd have bench seat, gurney, and then 2 hanging up above. That agency covered about 90 miles of highway. So there was quite a lot of space and not a lot of ability to get another ambulance out there. So if you get out there on scene and there's whatever, 5 patients, crap, now it's 45 minutes or something maybe for the next ambulance to get there. So that's a little bit different circumstance. We've got enough agencies kind of spread all over that we're not going to have 30, 40-minute response times very often. Think about other resources you might need. Something on fire, make sure the fire department's on the way. Is there something that is in need of technical rescue, either like vehicle extrication, somebody stuck in some kind of confined space where you need a confined space crew to come, some kind of high angle thing. We don't have a lot of high angle places around here. Anything like hazardous materials, any kind of large fluid leaks, incidents at like the chemistry building on campus. We have been up there once or twice when lab thingies went a little bit sideways. Questions on that one?